And I want to spend the remainder of our time talking about just a few takeaways that I want you to see from this little experiment, something that I think you should see going forward as it relates to wokeness, the woke right, and the Christian nationalist movement. So the first one is this. There's a clear relationship between James's hoax papers with the woke left journals and what just happened with American reform. Namely, both are blindly committed to vain ideological biases than rigorous scholarship. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. He used the Communist Manifesto and edited it in such a way to speak to the sensibilities of these people, while they had all of the time, opportunity, and ability to do a simple check of the literature through some kind of online check, and yet they didn't. Why? Because the ideological biases matched up with their core commitments as an organization and the Christian nationalist vision at hand. In addition to it, I think James was also showing that as an organization in the editorial process here, they're not even familiar enough with the literature to spot it when it takes place. Now, here's something that I want to do, that I want to pull us back into. It wasn't everybody. Somebody caught it here. In fact, one of the comments here, let's see if we can find it here. Right here. This person, Kurt Day, right in the bottom, their comments, first day, he notices it. He sees the connection immediately. And yet the editors of this entire organization, they didn't see it. Something interesting, something to consider in that regard. But let's keep going here. The second thing is this. The second takeaway that I want you to see is this incident reveals the true nature of Christian nationalism, and in many respects, it discredits American Reformer as a reputable organization. First, the fact that they published the article reveals their ideological commitments, plain and simple. Just like the fact that all of those other journals published the hoax papers revealed their ideological commitments, the same is true here. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Second, if you can publish this type of article, especially in today's age, when you can so easily search these types of fabrications, it shows the sheer ineptitude of the people working there. It's a very simple process. In fact, I was speaking with a friend of mine recently, knowing about this, because I've only known about it for like a day or two. And I asked him, because he works in a library, how easy is it for library faculty and staff to deal with these kinds of word searches? And how long would it take you? And he goes, we could figure it out instantly. You just plug it into a simple search and it's done in a matter of minutes. In fact, I have to do this teaching with students sometimes when you start to see the parallels. And in fact, a lot of times you can just copy and paste it into Google. Google's the best search that you can have for those kinds of things. My point is that going forward, I think it's going to bring serious questions about the academic integrity and consistency of this organization. Judge for yourselves. Another thing that you have to see here is that, sort of transitioning a little more, is that this incident ought to serve as the primary example to demonstrate the fact that Christian nationalism is functioning as the woke right. The sheer fact that their sort of token website or that their topic and token website published this article and published it with the sense of agreement demonstrates the true nature of their ideological commitments. So people can lay rest to the debate over whether or not the woke right is really a thing. They're clearly a thing, and people just need to refer to it as such. How? He demonstrated it by showing that by accepting the article, they're accepting the ideological commitments of what would have to make them the woke right. In addition to this, what we find is that there's a clear current of totalitarianism throughout the Christian nationalist movement. If they can accept something directly from Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto, it is a clear indication of their ideology and their commitments. And when you go read their other books and the other literature surrounding this, they're very clear. What's really interesting is that many of these totalitarian groups, they don't hide their positions. You can find them online, you can find them in podcasts, but you can also find it in their own books where they're talking about how they want to imprison or banish, or some of them would even say put to death figures who differ with this particular movement. That sounds like totalitarianism at its core. Now, just for the sake of time, let's keep going here. So, laying aside this whole editorial process and merely reflecting upon the fact a paper with these types of claims was published, it demonstrates that it's at its very core, Christian nationalism reflects very little with anything known as historic Christianity. They are clearly taking a Marxist philosophy and dressing it up in Christian garb. So here's where I want you to see this. The woke left used the same tactic when they used cultural Marxism in Christian garb to overtake the vast number of churches, theological institutions, and Christian colleges. And in this example, and in many of the ways that they interact, the woke right has used the same tactic as evidenced by this very publication, where they use Marxist categories clothed in Christian garb in an attempt to influence and ultimately control churches, theological institutions, and Christian colleges. The point is, the tactics used are the architecture or the ideological process of Marxism and dialectical warfare. So in today's context, we must ask this question when you see this, why are they operating the way that they do? Why are there so many different definitions of Christian nationalism out there? Well, the reason is because the Christian nationalist movement is being dialectically manipulated. The term is being intentionally horizontally manipulated so that they can achieve their vertical authoritarian goals. So if people are sort of confused about the definition of the term, they can achieve their narrative arc of the entire movement, which is a form of totalitarian control. I've done podcasts on that. You can look them up on the YouTube channel, various things online. But what I want you to see is this, is here's where probably the key contrast comes down to. As Christians, how should we define, determine, and base our different theological positions and how we should operate in society? It's found in Scripture. It's found in the clear exposition of Scripture. You find none of that with this movement. You find a lot of people who are very power hungry and yet very light when it comes to exegesis and theological engagement. So one of my big warnings for you, one of the big takeaways that I want you to see is this, is that you need to be so committed to the Scriptures as being your highest authority for faith and practice, lest you be duped by the woke left or the woke right. In addition to this, people need to see some of the key similarities between the two movements of the woke left and the woke right. We'll use three just for a case of example here. First, they both want control. The woke left calls everything racist until they control it. We've seen that in society for years and years on end. The woke right tends to call everything liberal or post-World War II consensus or some other term until they control it. The end goal is that they use various different tactics in order to achieve control. They're both control movements. Second, they're both collectivists in their thinking. The woke left and the woke right are both committed to a collectivist rather than an objective form of epistemology. In that sense, they're given over to a subjective form of perspectivalism and a sociology of knowledge. Now, you might find a counterexample here or there, but this is the broad speaking understanding of how this movement works. Now, this differs radically from a realist and objectivist understanding that grounds epistemology in reality, and they base those different epistemologies upon reality, in which we have objective truths, rights, and liberty. Now, you're going to find a few that do try to ground it in sort of this classical realist understanding, but they're the minority of the movement. The vast majority of them function as collectivist epistemology in their operating system, much like the woke left. In addition, and probably one of the more important is this, both the woke left and the woke right, they reject or have this open rejection of individual liberties. Both the woke left and the woke right can be considered post-liberals who openly disavow the classical liberal order that gave rise to the United States Constitution. In that sense, both of them want to disrupt, dismantle, and rewrite the United States Constitution. You might be saying, that's absolutely absurd. Go read their literature, go follow their tweets, listen to what they're saying here. The dissident right is a post-liberal movement, and a post-liberal movement is coming from these key figures who think that we are beyond the American classical liberal tradition that founded the United States Constitution and our Bill of Rights. Hence, we need a new founding for what those things mean. Christian nationalists believe that the American experiment is not salvageable because we live in a post-constitutional age. They are unclear about when this occurred, but there's a general agreement that we live in a post-World War II consensus that has basically moved on beyond the Constitution in favor of some type of globalist sort of ideology and movement. Therefore, we need a new founding, one in which we reestablish a constitution according to integralist premises and constructions. In addition to this group also desires to balkanize society and get ahead of the digital revolution. They recognize a purely digital society can and will be controlled by who oversees that network. They will enforce their movements both on the left and the right via their quid pro quo measures. In that sense, they are going to undermine a free economy and a free society because only those who are ideologically aligned are able to participate in their new society. In that sense, it's an authoritarianism that resembles Mao's commitment and vision of society. You don't want it, my friends. Now, the final thing that I want to look at here, and we'll start to wrap up with this. How should you understand this movement? What is it at its fundamental core if we're going to look at it in a theological category? The fundamental truth is that Christian nationalism is a form of integralism. And Christian nationalism has a long history of synthesizing church and state into what we've labeled as integralism. And this view is opposed to the freedom of religion and the freedom of speech found in constitutional liberties and in the Bill of Rights. They want the state to compel both religion and speech. And in that sense, it's directly against the Bill of Rights that gives us a freedom of speech and a freedom of religion. Now, the other thing that I want you to see here is that Christian nationalists view the reconstruction of society in terms of authoritarianism, not freedom. The progressive and Christian nationalists both desire to move away from constitutional liberties towards authoritarianism. Just like the progressive left believe we need to undo and redo the Constitution, so do Christian nationalists. The latter, however, they want to do it via a right-wing form of integralism, whereas the former want to do it via a left-wing form of integralism. Regardless, both approaches undo constitutional liberties and religious freedom for authoritarianism. However, the integralist right are favorable if the term, or what we find here is that the integralist right are favorable if the term and want to enforce their views through various blasphemy laws. So my point is that they're favorable of these concepts and they want to move these concepts along. And one of the means that they're going to do it is they're going to say, well, the left has their form of blasphemy laws, so why can't we have our form of blasphemy laws? And the way you see this worked out in much of the literature is you find a rising anti-Semitism in which they want to banish, kill, and imprison anyone who opposes their vision of society. This includes Jews, atheists, Buddhists, Muslims, liberals, or any group that doesn't align with their vision of society. And in that sense, they fundamentally undermine the freedom of religion. And like I've said, we've seen this before. We've seen what happens when Catholics do it to Protestants. We've seen it when Protestants do it to Catholics. We've seen it when Protestants do it to other Protestants with, Fritz Erba and Mary Dyer. And my point is this, my friends, let's not ever return unto it again. So the primary takeaways that I want you to get from this are the strong correlation that you find in the way that James Lindsay exposed the woke left and now the woke right. He used one form of a hoax paper, say, for example, rewriting a section of Hitler's Mein Kampf according to intersectional feminism to expose the woke left. And now he's used the Communist Manifesto with a slight, host of revisions and a few revisions within it in order to expose the woke right. What I want you to see here is that we can now rightly call these people the woke right. And you also need to be calling them for what they really are. The Christian nationalist movement is an authoritarian movement that represents historic Roman Catholic integralism and sacralism. Be aware of who they are, be knowledgeable of what they're trying to do, and resist the woke, whether it be on the left or on the right. Again, thank you. We appreciate it.